welcome to part 3 of the Inner Agility series, where we're illuminating that in the purest sense of the word, manifestation is not actually a matter of addition, but of subtraction. Inner agility is how well you're able to subtract specific ingredients from your inner image, which are blocking your smooth pathway to the goal. If you focus on training inner agility, which is what astrological transurfing is, then you'll improve on its 3 separate components of strength, balance, and coordination when it comes to all of your manifestations. In part 1, I explained how the presence of an invisible ingredient in your inner image can block any or all of these components and slow down or cancel out your manifestation. So if you haven't watched part 1, go back and watch that so you can carry those principles with you wherever you go. In part 2, we introduced many transurfing concepts that might be new to you. And transurfing is wonderful for understanding how to navigate the space of variation, but what it cannot do is reveal what your specific soul wants to experience in this incarnation. This is why I teach astrological transurfing, because I want my students to have both the inner clarity about what the soul finds fulfilling and the skill set to be able to dissolve obstacles and tune into their own soul's success sectors to reach that fulfillment in the physical world. In part 3, we're going to do an assessment of your current inner image so you can get a feel for the relationship between your inner landscape and your external reality sector. Remember the positive and negative poles that we discussed earlier? Those apply to any subject in the world, and becoming aware of which side of the polarity you're on for any given subject will reveal why a given subject is present or absent in your life. You can apply this to any goal or subject by looking at how the positive and negative poles relate to the scale of consciousness, which is the calibrated levels of human emotion developed using kinesiologic muscle testing by Dr. David Hawkins. When you think a negative thought, your muscles will go weak, but when you think a positive thought, the same muscles will remain strong. The amount of strength that each kind of emotion contains was tested and replicated over thousands of subjects to develop a visual scale that represents the relative power of each of the levels of consciousness. The positive emotions, all above the level of 200, have exponentially more power than the negative ones. This means that if we climb the scale of consciousness above this level, we have much more life energy, charisma, and creative power than if we remain closer to the negative polarity, where we are focused on the absence of what we want. If we want to achieve control over our inner metaphysical image, we cannot afford to ignore the quality of our inner emotional life. Being able to track where we are on the scale at any given moment for any subject is crucial. The limited conscious mind, or the ego consciousness, believes that its basic needs will not be fulfilled unless it comes up with its own plan. Actually, the negative emotions only reinforce our basic fear that we have to seek survival and security outside of ourselves. When we learn to surrender the negativity as we go along, this will give us access to the infinite number of solutions contained within the divine intelligence. These creative solutions are only accessible at the higher levels of consciousness. Someone who can consistently stay above the level of 200 would be a person who has the ability to align with external intention consistently, so that their inner image corresponds to what it would feel like for the goal to realize itself over and over again. This person has high levels of inner agility and have improved their strength, balance, and coordination when it comes to editing their inner image. When you really examine why the mind doesn't want to let go of a negative emotion, you will find that the smaller self is experiencing a payoff. For example, the smaller or ego self wants to hang on to the anger so that we can think about how right we are in a situation and how wrong another person is, or the smaller self wants to hang on to the grief because we feel that without it, we would not have a way to bond socially with those around us if we could no longer rely on trauma bonding. Actually, the opposite is true. If we choose to hang on to that anger or that grief because of that small payoff, then the next sector of reality that unfolds in our outer world will contain the kind of scripts and decorations that make us even more angry or filled with even greater sadness. If we hang on to that anger, grief, or fear in our inner image, the reality mirror doesn't have a choice but to reflect that back to us. Compensatory behaviors only compound the fear within our inner image, thereby keeping us on a level of fear indefinitely. In order to actually ensure things turn out the way that we want, we need to make sure that the negative energy is not sustained in our inner image. This is why the method of surrender itself is what ensures that our outer reality sector will no longer contain events that correspond to that energy of fear. Another thing that we try to do with negative energy that doesn't work is to resist the feeling. We don't want to feel grief or fear or depression, and so we do everything we can to suppress the feeling, deny its existence, bypass it by repressing it in our subconscious or trying to change it in some way. The reason this does not solve it is because one of the laws of the universe states, what we resist persists. The irony of this method is that in our attempts to resist the feeling, it ends up sticking to us like glue. So what can we do instead? How does the method of surrender work? We simply let out the energy that is behind the feeling as we give up our resistance to it. When we stop resisting the feeling will shift to the next higher level of consciousness automatically. This is how we climb the scale. Again, in the first step, we are simply staying present and accepting the feeling. That's it. Don't try to resist, bypass, or change the feeling in any way. Don't try to deny the feeling, or turn it into something else, or wish the feeling would go away, or some variation of getting around the feeling. Simply accept the feeling as it is without wanting to change it, and then become willing to release the energy behind the feeling. This will result in an overall lighter feeling in the body. It seems deceptively simple, but the results are profound, as you'll see in your outer reality sector. This is because when you commit to making surrender a habit, you're literally restoring the health of your inner image. And here's exactly what I mean by that. When your breathing becomes restricted, your health becomes compromised. And if your breathing becomes blocked completely, your health becomes threatened. In order to restore health, you would have to restore the inflow and outflow of the breath. The breath supports the body, which is an incredibly intelligent vehicle of your physical health. That same energy flow principle holds up when it comes to your inner image, which is your incredibly intelligent metaphysical vehicle, which supports your soul's true fulfillment and happiness. When people first start learning about the power of dissolving inner resistance toward what they don't want, at first they think they need to make resistance into the enemy, because they figure if the resistance is what is keeping what I don't like active in my life, then I should definitely fight with my resistance as hard as I can. The paradoxical thing about that is now they've put themselves in a position where they are resisting the resistance, which will bring about the opposite of what they're trying to achieve, which is to dissolve the resistance. The resistance will not dissolve if we take a defensive position against it. And now we are energetically stuck because we are not allowing the energy to flow, just as we would allow our breath to flow. If we allow the resistance to come up, we notice it, and then by not fighting with it, we surrender the energy behind it. If we take a defensive position, that's like refusing to inhale, and it will compromise our health. By fighting the negative feelings propping up our resistance, it will turn into an excess potential. If we continue carrying any type of excess potential, it will result in a sticky negative pattern in the outer world, which persists no matter what attempts we make to control the external. That's why I teach my students to simply dissolve the excess potential. It's simpler, faster, and way more effective. Identifying the thoughts you're having about an issue is useful only so that you can identify the specific emotion behind them. Even though the mind will try to be master of the soul, now is a good time to mention that when we're letting go, we need to ignore all thoughts, as they will only be relative truths from the point of view of our current level of emotion. Those specific thoughts will stop on their own anyway once the energy behind that emotion is surrendered. Yes, the thoughts belonging to that level really will stop if you're diligent with this. Once we surrender the energy behind the emotion of fear, the thoughts associated with that fear will stop, and they'll be replaced with the thoughts that correspond to the next level of consciousness that we have just jumped up to by our willingness to let go of the energy at the lower level. If we remain on the level of fear, what we create out of the fearful thoughts on this level would be quite different than if we had jumped to the level of joy. If you want a visual while you're doing the surrender technique, just imagine an energetic grounding cord that runs from the inside of your spine all the way down to the center of the earth. And imagine sending the negative energy into the earth's core, where Mother Earth can transmute it back into fertilizer. When you do this technique, you prevent an excess potential from forming in your inner image, which means you are not upsetting the energy balance with any false comparisons, which would lead to obstacles. Then, whenever you want to experience something new, you can say, okay, now before I can start adding all of these new elements to my inner image, I need to make sure I have a blank slate. This is because if we have any negative emotion that's creating an excess potential, the thoughts that are produced will be limited to that same level. This is what keeps us from manifesting and creating out of the higher positive frequencies that only become available as we climb the scale. As we've seen before, if a negative emotion is sustained long enough that it creates an excess potential, like a strong desire plus a strong fear that then morphs into artificially elevated importance, then that is when the balancing forces will introduce the obstacles in our life in order to restore an equal balance of energy. A scale of consciousness is so useful for the identification of negative energy, but sometimes even that alone isn't enough, because some of these habits are so ingrained in your way of being, it is as though you are a fish in water and you don't really recognize the presence of the water as water. That's why in part 4, we will be applying the principles to deconstruct the energy behind excess potentials, thereby clearing the source of the long-standing obstacles in your life. I'll see you in part 4.